Esu Edmundas Žvirblis, Visorių informacinių technologijų parko plėtros vadovas ir tarybos pirmininkas. Man smagu Jūs matyti mūsų parke. Jeigu kas čia nebuvote, tai norite daugiau sužinoti apie parką, tai galite prie manęs prieiti kavos pertraukų metu arba per pietus. Galės papasakoti daugiau. Mano sveikinimas yra trumpas, aš tik noriu pasidžiaugti, kad mes čia parke turime mokslo ir edukacijų leidybos technologijų klasterį, kuriame veikia tokia garsi Šiaurės Europoje kompanija Vytautas, kuri remia ir šitą mūsų konferenciją ir kuri užsiema mokslo leidybos technologijomis. Ir turime jums gerą žinią, kad pagaliau visos suinteresuotos pusės, kurios domisi šitą temą, susirinko į vieną vietą, nes mokslo leidybos laukia rimti iššūkiai ateityje. Ir skelbiu konferenciją atidarytą ir norėčiau pakviesti Lietuvos mokslo akademijos prezidentą Jūrą Banį perskaityti sveikinimo kalbą.
Labadiena, aš ir taip garsiai kalbu, mikrofono nereikia girdėti.
Yra įrašomas.
Įrašoma? O, čia tai rimta. Tai labą rytą, ponios ir ponai, mėly kolegos. Kai paprašė mane šnekėt, naktį nemiegojau, galvojau, ką čia pasakyti. Na, yra tokie įdomus padarai vadinami mokslininkais. Jie sėdi laboratorijose, bibliotekose, archyvose, dirba ir ką jie pridirba, jų likimas yra toks, reikia išpublikuoti. Na, paskleist, kaip sakoma, urbis et orbi. Miestų ir pasauliui. Na ir ką mokslininkas dabar turėdamas rezultatus galvoja? Jis galvoja, kad paskleisti taip, kad kuo plačiau pasklistų. Ir čia dabar praleidus eilę punktų, galima sakyti, kad jis žiūri pradžioj į geriausius žurnalus. Ar jo rezultatai atitiktų tų geriausių žurnalų lygį. Ir dabar naudojant terminą geriausias žurnalas, iš karto kyla mintis, kad pagal ką vertinam žurnalus? Pagal cituojamumą. Kiek žmonės juos skaito ir kiek tos straipsnius cituoja. Taigi pradedam nuo, matyt, Science, čia gamtamoksliai Nature, kur impact faktoriai yra virš 20 ir paskui rytame žemyn, jeigu ten nepriima, ir baigiam kokiam nors arba su impact faktorių 0,1 arba iš vis be impact faktoriaus. Tačiau esminis momentas čia yra tas, kad mokslininkas, kiekvienas mokslininkas nori atspausdinti savo straipsnį kuo geresnėme žurnale. Kitas dalykas – žurnalai ir leidyba. Čia ir susirinkom. Žurnalai ir leidyba, būkim atviri, tai yra didelis biznis. Kaip ir duomenų bazės, yra Wiley, Springer, Pergamon, fizikos yra American Institute of Physics, Physical Society of America, leidžia Physical Review, Journal Applied Physics ir panašių žurnalus. Ir dabar jau kyla du variantai. Arba tie straipsniai, kurie išeina, tai universitetai, institutai ir visi kiti turi juos prenumeruoti, arba mokėti už prieigą. Kitas variantas tai yra Open Access. Bet vėlgi, firmos, kurios leidžia Open Access, irgi, būkime atviri, labdarą neužsiima. Tai turi kažkas mokėti. Tai kasgi mokės? Tai jeigu Open Access, tai turi mokėti autoriai. Na, autoriai, aš abejoju, ar mokės iš savo kišenės, iš savo šeimos biudžeto. Tai turės mokėti universitetai ir institutai, mokslinio tyrimo įstaigos. Ir čia iškyla problema. Teko kalbėti su Vokietijos mokslininkais. Jeigu šiandien, tarkim, pereinama visiškai į Open Access ir už kiekvieną straipsnį reikės mokėti po 1000, tarkim, Nature grupės Scientific Report žurnalas kainuoja 1500 eurų. Jeigu mes mokam iš Lietuvos, tai dar pridėkim 21% PVM, ką mums reikia sumokėti. Ir bus 1803 eurai už vieną straipsnį. Vokietija taip pasakė, kad dėja, tačiau Vokietija šiai dienai tiek lėšų neturi. Kad visus vokiečių straipsnius, kurie išeina ne Open Access, išleisti per Open Access, tai kainuos milžiniškus pinigus. Na, Lietuvoje, žinant mokslo finansavimą, aš irgi abejoju, ar mes Lietuvoje, universitetai ir institutai galėtų šias sumas sumokėti. Taigi, yra daug klausimų. Tikiuosi, kad jūs juos visi čia sėkmingai aptarsite ir linkiu šiai konferencijai sėkmės. Dėkui.
Ačiū prezidentui. Tai sutaupėm laiko, tai galim kaip ir skirti prezidentui daugiau dėmesio. Gal kas norit paklausti, kokių klausimų?
Leonora Dagienė. Ir aš turiu klausimą gerbiamam prezidentui. Pasaulyje labai vyrauja gera nuomonė, kad akademinė bendruomenė turėtų perimti žurnalų leidybą į savo rankas, kad nereikėtų mokėti komerciniams leidėjams. Ką jūs manote apie tai?
Aš manau labai paprastai. Kadangi kas beleistų žurnalą, tas dalykas kainuoja. Nemokamų dalykų nebūna. Jeigu perima akademinė bendruomenė, tai akademinė bendruomenė turės už tai mokėti. Kiek, žinoma, leidyklos yra ir pelno siekiančios organizacijos, akademinės bendruomenės paprastai nėra pelno siekiančios, tai gal būtų šiek tiek pigiau. Tačiau, kad tai būtų visiškai nemokamai, tikrai šito nebus. Nebus, nesitikėkim. Šiais laikais viskas kainuoja. Na, pasitikėjimo aš čia negaliu kvestionuoti, tai yra tokie dalykai kaip tikėjimas, pasitikėjimas ir kiti dalykai, čia jau negalima pasakyti. Čia jau reikėtų žiūrėti kiekvieną atskirai paimtą konkretų atvejį.
Ar dar yra salėje auditorijoje klausimų? Nes prezidentas turės pabėgti greitai, tai naudokitės progą. Nu ką, nėra klausimų, tada jau pereisime prie, dėkui dar sykį, pereisime prie pirmosios jau dalies. Tada norėčiau pristatyti moderatorių, daktarę Rūtą Petrauskaitę iš Vytauto Didžiojo universiteto, kuri perims dabar iš mane šitą vaidmenį ir toliau moderuos visą savo pirmą dalį. Tai sveikinam ir linkime, kaip pasakyti, kūrybingos atmosferos ir daug klausimų vėlesnėje diskusijoje.
Ačiū. Pradėsiu lietuviškai nuo padėkos iniciatoriams šito renginio. Tai yra ypatingas įvykis, nes iniciatyva yra ne akademijos pusėje. Ir mes tuo labai džiaugiamės, akademija dalyvauja. Ir toliau dalyvaus, kai tik mus pakvies. Bet iš esmės tai yra išskirtinis įvykis ir, na, jauskim šitą išskirtinumą. Now I'd like to switch to English because the first part is going to be designed for our invited speakers. And I'd like to introduce the first one. I'm very glad that Toby Green could make to us. He is officially presented as formerly Chief Operating Officer and Public Affairs and Communication Department in OECD. His present situation is an intriguing secret. Maybe he'll tell himself, maybe he not. But I'd like also to tell that he has started his career with academic press before moving to applied science publishers, Pergamon Press and Elsevier Science publishers. And are you present or formerly chair of the Association of Learned and Professional Society of Publishers? Formally. Okay. So, Toby, the floor is yours. Yes, microphone.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I've never been to Lithuania before, so it's a pleasure always to come to a new city and to meet a new audience. So who am I, and what am I doing? Yes, I started my career 35 years ago, at least, working with academic press in London. I then went to a very small publisher called Applied Science Publishers, where I learned about journals. I then went to Pergamon Press, where I learned about ANI systems, abstracting and indexing services, CD-ROMs, and began to meet the digital world. And then I joined Elsevier, or rather Elsevier joined me because they bought Pergamon. And in fact, all the companies that I've worked in are now part of Elsevier, which is perhaps one reason why I went to the OECD, because I knew that Elsevier couldn't buy the OECD, and therefore I would be safe at the OECD. And at the OECD, what have I done for the last 2 decades? Well, I've done the publishing at the OECD. So I'm not really a journals publisher, and I'm not a book publisher. I see myself as a stuff publisher because it's all just stuff, and the stuff needs to get from the authors who create the stuff to the readers who consume the stuff. And I put it that way because it really is now in a digital age all just stuff, and we are still hooked up on the fact that a book is a book and a journal is a journal, and somehow they're different. No, they just contain answers to questions that readers have. And in a way, it's all just stuff, and it should be managed as all just stuff. Now, I've been asked to talk to you a bit about open access post-2020. I'm not a fortune teller, and I don't think really I can shed an awful lot of light on what may happen, but I can perhaps give you my view on where we've got to and where perhaps we might go. There is an Irish joke where you're lost in the middle of Ireland and you come across the farmer and he's leaning on the gate, and you say you want to go to Limerick, and he says, "Do you really want to start from here?" And in a way, I feel that we have no choice, obviously, to start from here, but there is an interesting question as to how do we get to where we are now. Just to summarize where I think we are now, 2 decades after open access was mooted as being a good idea, we have got to about 20% of journal articles born free. The number of books born free is probably not even 2%. And that's after 2 decades of effort. And it suggests to me that there's a fundamental problem in the methodology in trying to get to open access. Because if the music industry has flipped not once but twice its entire business model since the digital age, if you now have the complete revolutions in the way that video is transmitted, and yet in Skolcom we're still stuck with a model that we inherited from the analog era. So I think there is a fundamental problem as to that we're facing in the industry, and I think we need to try and unpick that. Now, there's a lot of criticism of the publishers. It's felt that the publishers are standing in the way of open access. Well, this doesn't seem to be true, because all the publishers that I know offer open access solutions. All the publishers that I know employ people who have job titles with open access in them. And all the publishers that I know have signed up to the idea that open access is a good thing. In fact, that every stakeholder in the business agrees that open access is a good thing and is something to strive for. So it can't be the publishers who are stopping open access. They've opened up the path to open access, but the authors are not following that path. The authors are choosing to submit their content to closed channels. So why are they doing that? Why are they still submitting their articles to closed channels? Well, one reason is that they haven't got the money to pay for the open channels. the cost of publishing a journal article, somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000, is beyond the means of anybody in the humanities and the social sciences. It's beyond the means of people in STEM who live in developing countries. It's even beyond those who don't have a job in STEM. So someone who's retired who wishes to still publish, they have no money to publish in any journal, let alone books. It costs about $20,000 to publish a book. Who's going to be able to afford the cost of an APC in the book world? So there's a problem with the affordability and a problem with where the money is in order to be able to foot the bill. But there's another factor. Why do authors, despite the fact that there are even platinum journals that offer to publish their work for free, and they still choose to submit their content to other journals that are not free? And that's because their careers are dependent on publishing in the traditional journals. Now, why are their careers dependent on publishing in those journals? That's because the promotion systems, that's because the grant-giving systems depend on where you have published. Not on what you have published, but on where you have published. And that, to me, is a fundamental problem. It seems to me ludicrous that simply because you've published in a journal that has an impact factor of X, that suddenly your work is somehow better than somebody else's work who's published in a journal of an impact factor of Y. It doesn't make any sense at all. Because your paper in the journal with a higher impact factor could in fact be in the long tail and have not been read at all. It may not have been cited at all. Equally, your paper could have been cited many, many times because it's rubbish. And everyone points out the fact that it's rubbish. So there's a famous example of the Pons paper on nuclear fusion. How many times has that paper been cited? It must have been cited hundreds of times. And yet that paper has been utterly discredited. So there is a fundamental problem in the fact that the scientists, the motivations for the scientists, the incentives for the scientists point away from publishing in open access journals. And therefore, that is not a problem that the publishers can solve. That is a problem that only two people can solve. The employers, and I use that term advisedly, the employers of scholars, which are the universities in most part, who seem to pay no attention at all in that problem, and they don't seem to be fixing that problem, and the funders, who do not seem to be fixing that problem either. I've had discussions with people who say, oh, but it's too difficult. We get too many applicants. We have to use metrics to help us understand whether we hire this person, promote this person, or give them a grant. Really? Is that true? When I employed people at the OECD, we would sometimes get 250, 300 applicants for a job. Did I look for some sort of metric in their application to help me figure out who I was going to employ? Of course I didn't. I had to plow through 250 CVs. I had to figure out their story on each case. I had to look at what they have done, not where they had done it, but what they had done to draw up my shortlist, and then I interview, and then I choose somebody. And that happens all over the world. For some reason, it doesn't happen in academia. And that, to me, is a fundamental reason as to why, one of the reasons why open access is stuck, is because the incentives for the scholars are not for open access. Actually, it's against open access. So, post-2020, I think we're at a fork in the road. We could stay where we are. We could stay with the status quo. We could try and follow what Plan S is suggesting, which is basically the status quo, but batter the publishers to try and get the publishers somehow to fix a problem that they can't fix. The read and publish deals that the publishers are now negotiating with libraries will take you some of the way forward, but that will only work if you're a big publisher working with a big set of libraries. It will not work for the small publishers because they have no means of negotiating with the library consortia. Therefore, it will only get you so far. But the read and publisher deals will do something else. They will take money out of the system. There is an idea that there is enough money in the system to pay for open access. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe there is enough money in the system because there is an inflation in the number of articles being published every year that exceeds the amount of money in the system. Therefore, there's not enough money in the system. But consider this. As more content goes open access, those institutions that buy subscriptions and buy content but do not publish, what I call these institutions read institutions, they necessarily will take their money out of the system because they have no need to pay for the content anymore. And there are a lot of these companies, and there are a lot of institutions. At the OECD is a read institution. It does not publish in the academic journals, it publishes in its own publishing operation. The OECD, if it has the opportunity to get content for free, it is not going to pay money into the Couperin consortium of which it's a member. Even if it wanted to pay in, it would not be allowed to pay in. The auditors would quite rightly say, why are you contributing to publishing scholarship from French institutions when you're the OECD? You're not supposed to do that. In some countries, it's illegal for public institutions to spend public money when there's a free service on offer. So money will necessarily fall out of the system. There will not be enough money in the system in that scenario, which means that the published institutions, those that publish a lot of content, the cost will fall on their shoulders. In a paper I published recently, I gave the example of Hong Kong University. Hong Kong University currently is paying roughly about 7 million on APCs and on subscription content. But the APCs is only about, I forget the number, it's about 20% of what they publish. If they paid APCs on everything that they publish, their costs would go up to 12 million. They'd have to nearly double the amount of money that they spend. And they do not have that money to spend to pay APCs for all of their output. So I don't believe that the read and publish model is scalable, and I don't believe it will actually be a solution. So essentially, I think that path will, yes, it may inch forward open access. We may get up from 20% to maybe 40% of the number of journal articles, but I think then it'll get stuck. And as for books, I still see no path for books that's going to change things significantly. So what to do? How are we going to solve this problem? Well, I think we need to use a technique called digital transformation. Now, you might think, oh, hang on. We've had digital transformation in scholarship. All the journals are online, aren't they? No, what we've done is we've digitized an analog process. That's all we've done. We simply flipped what was an analog process and we've digitized it. That is not digital transformation. Digital transformation is when you rethink an entire process and you challenge at every step of the way each step in the process and you see what you can get rid of. Now, I'll give you an example. I recently had to renew my passport. I live in France. I'm British, you can probably tell from my accent, which meant that I had to get a new passport. Now, the last time I did that, I had to go to the consulate in Paris. I had to queue, get a form, take the form home, fill in the form, get other people to sign the form to say, yes, I was a British and I'm not a criminal. And I then had to take photographs, and I then had to go back to the consulate where I had to queue once again to hand over the form with all of the bits of paper and stuff. And that the form then was sent somewhere in the UK. And then the passport was sent back to the consulate. Then I would have to go back to the consulate for a third time to go and get my passport. Okay, so totally elapsed time, weeks. Hassle, huge. Okay, cost to everybody, me and to the consulate and everybody, enormous. That was the analog system. The new system was very simple. I went to a website. On the website, I filled in a very simple form. I scan my passport. I scan in my new photograph. I pay. It then invites me to print out a single piece of paper with a barcode on it. That's all I had to do, and sign it. As the only analog piece that I had to do was to put my signature to a single piece of paper that had nothing more on it than a barcode. I put the barcode, my old passport, in an envelope, and I send that to the UK. And 2 weeks later, my new passport arrived. So they had simplified this process. They had completely re-engineered this process, and they'd made it much cheaper for everybody and much easier for everybody. Now you can imagine what happened, that when that piece of paper with the barcode arrived in England, someone would have got one of these barcode scanner things and zapped it. That would have brought up the details on their screen, and they would have had all the information that I put on the computer on their screen. But I bet also in the background what had happened is an engine would have been looking at my application and would have pre-checked to see whether or not I was on some banned list. So in the background, they would have been using AI or other sort of clever stuff to figure out whether my application was real or not. But this is the important thing here. They completely rethought the whole process to achieve the same end, me getting my passport. Now, in Skolcom, isn't it time we rethought the whole process? Isn't it time that we rethought how are we going to make scholarship get from the author to the reader really quickly? How are we going to reduce the cost of doing it so that actually we can maybe afford open access? Now here's a question for you. It costs about $10 to submit a paper to one of the preprint servers. Okay, so if you look at the cost of running Archive, the physics preprint server, and you look at the entire cost and number of submissions, you do that division, it costs $10 a preprint. That preprint is now public and it's open. And its cost, Skolcom, $10. You publish in any journal and it costs about $3,000. And you've made your paper public. Tell me, why is it worth Skolcom spending $2,990 to make that paper public in a journal when it costs $10 to make it on a preprint server? What is the difference in that exercise? Is it worth $2,990 additional dollars to put it in a journal? Because that's what's happening today. Now what I would suggest is this, is that we rethink the system so that every paper is put onto a preprint server. So that's $10 for every paper. And then you stop. And then you wait. And you see if the paper gets any attention. We know a lot of papers get no attention. They're barely read, and they're never cited. And yet we're still spending $3,000 per paper on those papers. And worse, which papers are more expensive? The good ones or the bad ones? Anyone like to guess? It's the bad ones. Because the bad ones get rejected 2 or 3 times, which means that's an additional cost on those papers than on the good papers. So we have an insane system where we're spending more money on the bad papers than we are on the good papers. So you put every paper on a preprint server, you let those papers live or die. If they get attention, you then get the journals to bid to publish them. So you no longer submit to a journal, the journal invites you. You've published an interesting paper, come publish with me. And then the author's going to go, why should I publish with you? I've got this other author, other editor inviting me too. Who offers the better deal? Suddenly you've injected elasticity into the market. Because what I haven't mentioned up to now is the market up to now is not elastic, which is why the profit margins are so huge. But suddenly you've got elasticity because it means that the author is going to go, okay, Journal A, what's your offer? Why should I publish with you? Journal B, that's a better offer. I'm going to go with Journal B. And that's going to pull down prices because the journals are going to have to start competing on price. They're going to have to start competing on value. And then not every paper gets published, not every paper spends the $3,000, and suddenly you've brought the cost right down, and only the better papers, the more interesting papers, will actually get the peer review process and get all of the bells and whistles that goes with journal publishing. And then suddenly the whole cost falls. And if the whole cost falls, then maybe we can make it affordable and make it open access. So there we are. I'll leave that thought with you. Thank you very much.
Maybe questions. Thanks a lot for the raising the hot issue of affordability. We all know about it. We all discuss it silently, but we do not dare to make it so public as you did. And now, time for questions. Are there any questions? Yes, please, Elena. Could you be standing a little bit closer to the camera? Yeah.
Thank you, Toby, for your talk. My name is Elena Shimakaitė. I'm a PhD student in Vienna doing research about the proposed transition from subscriptions to open access. And there are a number of things that strike me in this kind of discussions every time. One of them is always that open access is set equal to paying article publishing charges, which basically shows how effective the public relation campaigns of commercial publishers were. And there are probably 15 other models how to do open access. It doesn't have to pay. Doesn't have to mean that you need to pay. But trying also to relate the opening speech and the question that Eleonora had afterwards, I would like to raise the issue of complicity of academic institutions in their interest in reproducing the system and having this incentive system, which is in a way forcing researchers to publish with the high impact journals, although we all might argue and we all might know that, you know, not where you publish, but the content of your work should be important, right? So I would like to raise that point, if that means that we actually are trusting those commercial publishing companies more than our own academic institutions and academic, and that is why we do not dare and have this inner anxiety to try to attempt the divorce from the current system and to try to establish our own infrastructure, take back the controls to our hands. And the other point, because I just read your article on transformative agreements on the way to this conference, Are We Being Willfully Blind? I guess was the title, right? The other point would be about the transformative, so-called transformative agreements themselves. I share much of critique with you as well. Do you expect this kind of experimentation with this marriage between big deals and prepayments for APCs to get abandoned sometime soon? Thank you.
Yes, well, there's a lot in what you said. First of all, commercial publishers, all publishers are commercial. This idea that not-for-profit publishers are not commercial is wrong. All publishers are commercial. The difference being that the private sector publishers, the profits go to shareholders, and in the not-for-profit, the surpluses, because they're called surpluses rather than profits, but they're the same thing, go to whoever the owner is of that journal, and they use them for whatever purposes that they use. But if you're not commercial, you fail. You have to be commercial if you're running what is a business. And therefore, every publisher is commercial. And the other little dirty secret is that the successful not-for-profit publishers have margins that are just as big as the big for-profit publishers. Okay, the American Chemical Society, the Institute of Physics, the Royal Society of Chemistry, you name it, their margins are of the same order of magnitude as the big for-profit publishers. Because it's the same system. And it's the system that generates the profits because there's no elasticity in the market. That's why. So it's important to understand that because there is this sort of idea that somehow one set of publishers are more evil than the other. Well, no, they all work in the same way. There is no difference. On the transformative agreements, which lead to these, first of all, I don't think they're transformative at all. They're simply flipping the existing big deal model. They may achieve, as I said, they may achieve a few more articles being made open access, but I don't think it solves the problem. The problem being that scholars still want to publish in the high value brands because it furthers their career. So you haven't addressed that problem, and that problem I think is central to the challenge, and it hasn't addressed the other problem, which is cost. It's too expensive, or rather, it's not too expensive. Today's funding is not adequate to keep up with the cost of publishing, and that is a reality that no one really wants to look at. But it's been around since the 1980s when the cereals crisis started. And it hasn't gone away, and it's only getting worse. There is this idea that digital publishing is cheaper than analog publishing, and that is wrong. I've run both analog publishing programs and digital publishing programs, and I can tell you that digital publishing programs are way more expensive than our analog publishing programs. The costs are insane. They're so high. And it's because digital isn't stable yet. It's still evolving. And also because there are so many new bells and whistles attached to digital that were not true and didn't exist in the analog world. The other significant point is this, is that in the analog world, the libraries stored the knowledge. In the digital world, it's the publishers who store the knowledge. So that role has flipped, and the cost of that has flipped. So the publishers now have to hold all this stuff. They have to maintain it. They have to keep it online. So the investment cost in digital has not gone away. It's huge. And the sorts of people you have to employ on the digital are way higher than the sorts of people that one had to employ in the analog world. It's such a different environment, the sorts of people that one is employing, the sorts of skills that one has to have on the team. And it's the investment cost. At the OEC, we were investing more than 10% of our budget every year in new technology, which is an enormous burden that was not there in the analog world. And therefore, this issue of cost, I think, is really vital to look at because I can't see the cost going down anytime soon if we carry on with the model as it is. And so transformative agreements are not transformative. They just simply, you're moving the decks, moving the deck chairs on the Titanic in a way, because you're not addressing I think the central problem.
Which all the subscriptions are going, and I would like to ask, so why we are talking about this, why the academia is not rethinking the system of evaluation? And because this is what everybody acknowledges, that this is the main thing. So, and it's in the hands of academia. So why we are not doing it?
I'm not sure I can answer the question because I'm not a member of academia. There is the DORA, the San Francisco, I forget what DORA stands for, Declaration for whatever it is, and that is, I think, gaining a wee bit of traction. It is beginning to change minds, but I go back to. I think the fundamental problem sits with the employers. And again, I use that word advisedly because I don't think the people who do the employment realize that they're employers. They call themselves provosts and deans and all sorts of other things. They're employers. They're managing directors of universities. But they're not managing their university in this regard. I spent 20 years publishing at the OECD. OECD is just like a university. It does research. It doesn't do anything else. It just does research. The OECD decided back in the 1960s that it was going to self-publish everything it produced. So it runs a publishing operation. And that's how it chose to publish. And as did every other international organization, they self-publish. Now, that's sort of kind of interesting. So why doesn't Harvard self-publish? Why doesn't Oxford self-publish? Why doesn't the Sorbonne self-publish? Because if they did self-publish, then they take responsibility for what they publish. I've been sort of challenged when I was running the OECD's publishing. Oh, you don't do you don't do peer review. No, the OECD doesn't do peer review in the way that happens in academia. We do something that was way more stringent. Because we publish under the OECD's own name, we really worry about the quality of what we publish. Because if it goes out under our own name, under our own imprint, and it's low quality, it damages the brand of the institution. And the institution's brand is absolutely vital because that's where the funding comes from. So if the OECD put out rubbish, you can be sure that the member countries would cut the funding. So does Harvard look at what it's publishing? Does Oxford look at what it's publishing? Because it's your brand on the line here. So if Harvard wishes its content to be open access, it has a very simple path. It creates an open access platform and it tells the people at Harvard, you have to publish on it. But I can see people in the audience thinking, academic freedom. Really? Really? Isn't academic freedom the freedom to do research? Where you publish shouldn't matter. Isn't it like that? Why is this idea, I have the freedom to publish in Nature? Why? Because it goes back to your point, because it furthers your career. And then you're back to the loop, back to the management again. No, your career should be based on what you've done, not where you publish. And these are the questions. This is in a way, I'm not suggesting necessarily every single university starts its own publishing program, but it's really unpicking the system, looking at the system in the round to say, isn't that what's holding it back? Because I think it's what's holding it back, and it's certainly making it very expensive.
I think it's not a question, it's more like a clarification for you, Toby, because Lithuania has this model already. This model is implemented in Lithuania. Every university, every research institution has its own publishing house. So we have self-publishing for many, many years. And no one researcher from one university never publish with other university. It's his or her textbooks or monograph or something like that. So we have already implemented what you say, self-publishing.
But the point I'm making is that everything from the institution has to go through the press.
Yes.
And I'm sure that is not true in Lithuania. I mean, I don't know any university press that publishes everything that comes out of its parent institution.
And the academic community, before the manuscript comes to university press, it's always went through all evaluation from department and any committees by university press.
The people in the audience seem to be shaking their heads.
Yes, please.
comment because I'm as kind of administrator. I'm vice director for research, and I had many, how to say, I already got some stones into my yard. So it's how to say that yes, administrators, university are guilty for everything. Well, I'm used to that. So finally, but there's several points. How to say, we would be glad. Okay. So to evaluate, how to say, you are according to the soft criteria, community, and so on. But I see there are several such a caveats. First of all, we tried, according to in Vilnius University, to implement at least some elements of peer review, of quality assessment. And what happened? So it happened that our research community very often for us ask, just give for us criteria. How to count, how to evaluate. So administration should provide that. So I just sometimes say I had very rough criteria. Rough answer. If we just knew the exact criteria for each field of science, we would just simply we would need selection committees and so on. Just some people in our human resources department would count, how to say, according to these criteria. We would sign the contract, and that's it. So this is one point. So just sometimes it is just easier for researchers to count on that, especially in some fields. So this impact factor and the Hirsch index. So these are such. There is some inertia in academia. But who are judges? Sometimes in smaller and close communities. I would answer, well, how to say that peer review goes in department and so on. It doesn't go. First of all, it's academic freedom. Second, who are judges? There always could be subjectivities, and the smaller the community, the bigger subjectivity. How to say, having some own, how to say, accounts and frictions and so on. So this is one point. It simply does not always work in practice. And second, in practice, so we have also formal requirements of funders and other regulations. So just we have now very tough discussion with our Research Council of Lithuania, that is funder of research projects, and that requires, how to say, a researcher is being evaluated, you could be promoted if such and such number of your papers should be published in quartile number 1 and quartile number 2 of science. So this is not always everything in hands of university administration. But of course, I'm always ready to take the guilt. Thank you.
I apologize if you feel that I was attacking, but the point I was sort of trying to make is that it is a sort of systemic challenge, and therefore all the stakeholders need to really consider the situation, rather than as people are tending to do, which is to point to one stakeholder only or another stakeholder or whatever. It's a systemic challenge, and therefore makes it incredibly challenging to change. I totally accept that. And also, just to make one thing crystal clear, the reviewing system inside the OECD isn't inside the OECD. It's done through with all the member countries and so on. So you get away from the idea of you're literally just being checked by the people down the end of your corridor. Just to make that clear, that the OECD doesn't just check the work inside the institution itself. That would be very unhealthy. But there is in a sense, there are committees behind every piece of work, and it gets checked by the committees. Just to clarify that.
I'm sorry to cut the discussion short for now, but we can continue with it a little bit later. Our time is out. Thank you so much once again. And I'd like to invite our next speaker, Vice Minister from the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, Jekaterina Rojaka.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tabi, for this enlightening discussion, and all of you. My topic is a little bit more broader than the topic of the conference itself, but I've already understood that we have a lot of common topics. First of all, it's always about the trust. So trust, and when we talk about open data, whether it is open scientific data or open data as it is, we talk about the trust. And when we talk about data, can I have my presentation please now? It is very important to understand that data now rules the world. And from Ministry of Economy and Innovation, we're looking forward to find those connections between the academia and the business. And we see that innovations are not going forward without scientific data and without scientific results. And that is one of the, another important, thank you very much. Another important thing. When we talk about Lithuania and when we present Lithuania to other countries, to potential investors, we always talk about the facts and about how in good locations we are, when 3 days, we are by logistics. From Lithuania we can reach most countries, and in 5 days almost all the Europe and partially the Asia. But guess what? The data actually doesn't need those 3 days or 5 days. The data is a flow of opportunities. And of course, we put a lot of attention to the aspect of digital Lithuania. And digital Lithuania, again, it's not bringing the old concepts and from analog world and digitalizing them. It's digital by nature. It's totally different concept of what we have done and what we are doing now. It should be done totally different. And we put a lot of attention to that, starting from artificial intelligence strategy, digital Lithuania strategy, Opal Data Board, GovTech Lab initiatives. And of course, we have good infrastructure for that. It would be difficult to implement without having infrastructure. But we know many examples when infrastructure put in set in the countries, but nothing happens on the business side. So when we talk about prosperity and prosperous countries, we usually start talking about resources. And if we take a look at resources on wheat, who is the main? China, India, on uranium, Canada, Australia, gold, China, South Africa, Australia, etc., etc. We're not so rich in natural resources, and in Lithuania we have water that will be, I believe, valued in the future very much. We have talented people, that's true, but we should add to those resources such resource as a data. And open data is a huge game changer for all the economy. And we see that it's very common to say that the data is the new oil for the economy. And but we also see that it is a great treasure and a point of profit for those who has this data and who knows how to use the data. Because if you only have the data, it doesn't make sense. If you know how to use the data, but you don't have it, it doesn't make sense either. So you need to have the data, and you need to know how to use that. And of course, the trust. As you already mentioned, the trust between the two parties are very important, but the trust, this is the Nordic gold, because Nordic countries has this social trust on a higher level. Lithuania, in the ranking of maximum 10 points, we are below 5. So there is definitely a lot to do on the trust level. And of course, before, when we talk about trust, what was the trust? The major and the platform of the trust was the connections, the relationships between the families, between some kind of nepotism that now is not so popular, but nonetheless, the relationship was very important. In last century, the trust was institutionalized. So institution was trustful. Otherwise, there were lots of questions. Now we see that those connections have been broken by Panama Papers, but other things. And data and open sources becoming more and more interventional to the to the economy itself, and it had a huge impact on the companies. It has a huge impact on the profits and huge impact on the countries. And of course, we have lots of choices. You know, whether we should take the Lithuanian airport in Vilnius 10 years ago. You're a foreigner, you're getting lucky, Toby. you for the first time came to Vilnius this time only. But 10 years ago, when you get out from the airport, you take a taxi, you will get tax fare like 5-10 times higher than the ordinary one. Now we have different applications where you know that who is the driver of the taxi, when it is coming, what will be the fare, and and you see how it is moving. So we get in trust via open data, and those applications are actually made on open data too. We heard most probably about the cutting forests problem, right, in Kaunas district, where there was forest and then it suddenly somehow disappeared. But now with the open data sources, we have these special forces. It's a great application that actually, with the help of the drones, spotted the changes in the geographical plots, whether it is forest or whether it is lake, what has happened geographically in 1 year, 2 years, and you can see the changes, online and momentous view. So we not only need to have the data, we also need to monitor and to make use of that. So when we talk about Lithuania and open data, yeah, you know the 12-step program for getting to the better place. So the first stage always is honesty, right? So we're not in denial. The relationship is quite complicated. If we take a look on a lower situation, so the main problem is low literacy and low quality of the data. Lithuania, by overall data literacy programs in the government and monitoring impact, is far, far from OECD average or the flagman countries. It's even far from the average of European Union. And that is, there are two reasons behind, because 91% of all the government open data is in closed formats, such as PDF, XLS. It's not readable by machines straightforwardly. You still need a human being to transform it somehow, or at least to write a program that will be transformed it. 64% is one-time data, so it's not continuous. And with one-time data, you can do hardly better results. On open data maturity rankers, we are the follower. We are the follower, somewhere in the mid, roughly 46% of our maturity, if we take the ranking to 100%. So it's again below a half of that. We have some progress, that's for sure, since 2015, both on open data readiness, on portal maturity, on overall maturity. We've grown quite well. We also have moved within the followers circle towards the better place, but nonetheless, it's still quite low. Yeah, of course, if you take European Union average, it's also far from 100%. It's only 65. But we at least know where we would like to stand. We would like to be among the leaders in European Union and going beyond that. Again, if we take a look on what is happening with the open data and on the impact for the economy, we're quite good at policies, and we've put, frankly speaking, quite a lot of efforts recently to make those policies better. So we're quite good on policy framework, coordination on national level, licenses, norm, etc. But we're very, very bad at impact. That again means that we have the data, we do not use it. Or those who have the data, they do not provide the data to those who can use it. And again, on the social impact, we're quite low. On economic impact, 31%, it's very low. In other places, definitely those are indicators for further work, and a lot has been done recently in last year and this year. As already mentioned, on the policy, we have Digital Agenda Lithuania, we had Open Data Strategy in process, and all the definitions for priorities. On the impact, again, one of the most important things is awareness of importance of open data. And we talk about that to the government, to the parliament, to academia, and also to the businessmen. Because we, in this field, we definitely need a lot of cooperation. Without cooperation, that will be a nightmare. And of course, working on the quality and the portal. We do have the single gateway to open data, the Lithuanian Open Data Portal, where we always and continuously introduce more and more data sets that provide better opportunities for both the scientists and the businessmen. So what are the barriers to open data publication and reuse? Barriers for data publication: legal, organizational, financial. Financial is the key point very often. For data reuse, again, data reuse is the key for the economy. We need to reuse the data in the sense to make it to commercialize the data. And low awareness is one of the striking points on these barriers. Also the technical reasons, and then comes the low availability. As already said, the legal point has been transformed quite well. So better understanding the overall open data impact is very important. And better understanding and cooperation. So we have in any sphere, from economic, environmental, political, and social, we need the strategical awareness and understanding what we can do with open data. And it's increasing inclusion of socially excluded groups. It's increasing trust between the citizen and between the government, between the academia and between the businessmen. And those are could be made through the new blood or the open data. And again, the value generated by open data doesn't derive from the mere publication of open data. Again, it's not enough. We definitely need those several stages. That's strategic awareness, monitoring, and open data reuse, focusing on reuse of the domains and pilot communities. So what we're doing right now, it's actually putting those pilot projects for institutions to make more and more data sets available in the format that is readable not only by scientists but also by the machines straightforwardly. And we have 3 digital agendas. It's effective digital states, it's sustainable digital economy, because we see that the economy with the open data, with the new technologies, with the new digital transformation, it is the new fuel for the economy. The IT sector, if we take a narrower concept, takes only up to 3.2% of GDP. If we take the broader concept, it's already ending up about 7%, including the e-commerce, etc. If we calculate the broadest, it will be up to 10% of the economy already now. So it's a huge part of the economy, and it's growing. We also, if we take a look back, like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, when I started studying, I put so many time into making my own library, printing and reprinting best articles. Oh, how I was naive. And I believe that in 5 to 10 years, we will be looking back in 2019 with all our structures at the moment and saying how we were naive at that time. It was probably, it is very difficult to predict, but we should be ready for the changes. And the smart society should be also ready for the future and for the future labor market with totally different skills and totally different society. So in digital evolution of the public sector, we have a lot of so-called e-islands. E-health, e-government, e-taxes, e-science, e-policy, e-schools education, etc., etc., with very different IT competence maturity, with very different infrastructure, with very different levels of security. Our aim is actually to look on it holistically, systemically. Digital Lithuania, with all the connections between the education and public administration, municipalities and healthcare, all the experts integrated under unified architecture, open data in interoperability, centers of excellence and standards, holistic security and resource management that we definitely lack. Because of the EU funds, a lot of, well, every single receiver got his own or her own ideas how to manage the resources, how to manage the data. And we've ended with this part. So now we start thinking digitally, and as already Toby mentioned, we definitely need this part to be integrated into our life. So our plans for this year and beyond, some of them have already implemented: IT management model, G-Cloud architecture, service data map, digital Europe coordination, law on information resources in the process, virtual or digital offices in the process, ready for the parliament. Digital Lithuania strategy, podcast, GovTech implemented, map of digital Lithuania, etc., etc. So step by step, we are getting closer to this cooperation. And I was asked also to present open data initiative. So starting from 2017, when the methodological background was put for the legal measures to open data in Lithuania. Now we have created the open data platform, and we also are prepared for the opening of data in the public sector of the second stage. Those stages are currently with the pilot projects on the open portal. We have roughly about 300 data sets with project partners such as National Tax Authority, Employment Services, etc., etc. On the second stage, which is supposed to start next year, we have more than 500 data sets with more than 60 institutions, making those data interoperable. So for us, for the economy, it is very important not only the publishing the articles, but also the publishing and sharing the data sets of the articles. And I am getting to the final stages. So for the economy, definitely, it is very important also to see the good practices. And we have those good practices. We have good practices on the Vilnius municipality with their interoperability of open data. Also about the parliament and on Sodra. The Trafi actually is one of our successful startups. Now we have more than 940 startups, and quite a bulk of them are using open data. So they're using to reroute you for the fastest way and for the most for the better way. So you're not and so you will be saving time. And also on international transparency about the open courts. This is the example of creating trust again between the citizen and the governmental institutions. or for the parliament, when you can actually click on every parliamentarian and see how often he or she is present and what were the main solutions and decisions have been meant regarding the specific laws. So there are more and more of them, including the Kur gyvenu, on the quality living in Vilnius or around the Lithuania. So definitely we see that open data and open scientific data and articles are creating and opening new horizons for the economy, for the prosperous Lithuania. But it's not only the hope. We don't want to be hopeful. We want to be part of that. So thank you very much.
I see one hand. We have time just for one or two short questions.
Well, again, I would like to speak in the name a little bit of academia. From the point of view of economics, I see you are more interested in data than in the interpretation. So it means that the publications, papers, anyway, scientific by itself. So it means that they should contain some not only results but discussion as well. So where do you see the position and the place of researchers of sciences just only producing the data that are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, or would you expect something more? Because I'm just afraid that we will meet situation like internet was. That was perfect when it was invented. It was perfect platform for sharing knowledge, sharing information. And where we are now, this is enormous, huge trash box.
Yeah, that's true. At this stage, we're more interested to open the data as it is to create the ecosystem. And this ecosystem needs to be done because we want to see results. But the results are coming not from the pure data, as already mentioned, but from the connection, the data, the owner, and the manager, right? So the scientific results, and I wouldn't be fair if I talk only about the data. The scientific results are very important for the businesses. It's not from the governmental point of view. From the government point of view, we need to see prosperous both scientific society and also the business society. And I believe that this integration and connection between the two aisles at the moment would be leading to those results.
Any more? Any other questions?
Just make spelling correction on prosperous.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Thank you once again, especially for giving the background of and the importance of data, not necessarily research data, but as I'll show later, it can be input data for research. And now let's move to another presentation by Irmantas Pečiūra from the Research Council of Lithuania, the institution that since 2013 is taking care for the coordination of open access in Lithuania.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank for organizers to make this event possible and raise these questions, which is very important in the current debate on the open science policy in our country. My name is Irmantas Pečiūra, and I'm representing the Research Council of Lithuania. As you know, the Research Council is the main competitive research funding organization in Lithuania, and as well near the other important aspects of the research policy, we are responsible for the promotion and implementation of open science policy in our country. So basically, today my presentation is named as Open Science Policy in Lithuania and Europe, but mostly I will try to focus what kind of open science policy we're implementing in our institution, which is the Research Council of Lithuania, in the context on the current debate which is going on in the European level as well. So first of all, it is important to mention that really at the international level there is a very huge discussion going on regarding the open science, and it involves a lot of different stakeholders who have pretty different interests. So it is worth to mention that the European Commission, for example, is doing the great job by the promotion of open science policy, as well the Science Europe. Personally, I'm involved in one of the working group, which is trying to monitor the current situation in the European countries regarding implementation of open access politics. As well, the huge stakeholder is the UNESCO, which is now monitoring all the situation regarding this policy all over the globe. And there is not only the governmental institutions involved, but as well we can count different countries who are taking individual steps to promote this policy. For example, we can mention the Plan S or Coalition S countries, and as well we have different interests from the private entities, for example publishers like the Fronters and others. So really it is a really huge debate going on the international level right now. So as the institution, we're trying to keep in touch about all the things which is happening in this kind of organizations. Speaking about the open science policy, and more particularly about our country, Lithuania, as far as you know, the open science is very broad description, and it involves in itself the other aspects of open science, like open access, open source software, citizen science, open peer review, and other initiatives. And basically speaking from the point of view of the Research Council, we are focusing only or mostly to the open access aspect, which is like you have separate branches like open access to scientific publications and the open access to research data. So currently this open science aspect is most important for us. And you can see how we define the open access in our institution. We understand the open access as the free and restricted online access to scientific publications, research data, and other published or unpublished peer-reviewed research material that is available to any user to freely read, copy, carry out, and automatic content analysis without infringing copyrights. What we see from our institution point of view from the current debate in the European level or international level, we see that really by publishing the research results openly, it contributes to the various sectors of the country and mostly to the science, economy, and society. So it is really, we see that mostly those research results which are published in open access journals, mostly they are receiving the highest citation rates. As well, we see that how it contributes to the science that in compliant with the grant rules mostly, which every research funders have. And as well, it's contributed to the science by this mean that the access for research, so researchers from all over the world can freely access your research results, so we see this as an important thing. As well, the open access contributes to economy in that way that practitioners can apply research findings for their commercial activities, so in the other context it speeds up the innovation, so it's really important. And as well, it contributes to society because as research funders, we are using the public money. So it is, we can say that taxpayer get value for their money. And it have a greater transparency because the society can look for what they pay, and in the other means as well, for example, research organizations, research funders or governmental organizations can as well use the research results for their policy. Now I would like to describe you more specifically about the current open access policy which we implementing in the Research Council right now. So we have the legal act which was approved in 2016 February, and it's named Guidelines for Open Access to Scientific Publications and Data. And the main purpose of these guidelines is to present the Lithuanian researchers and research institutions the general principles underlying open access to the results of publicly funded research. So it is worth to mention that our objective is to regulate only this field which is funded from the public expenses. So we are not regulating the open access policy at the national level. So mostly on the publicly funded research. And as I mentioned, the guidelines object is split into the two. So open access to scientific publications, the one huge thing, and the other is the open access to scientific data. Now I would like to shortly describe what is the open access to scientific publications and what is the position of the Research Council right now. So mostly there is two traditional ways how every researcher can publish their research publicly. There are more ways, but this two traditional, we can say, ways. So the first so-called the gold open access route is when a researcher is deciding to publish their research results in the open access journal, and as you know, those open access journals have charges for the publication to be open. So it is up to a researcher to pay that APC cost, and then the publication immediately become the open access. There is the other possibility, which is called the green route of the open access, when the researcher deciding to publish their research results in the subscription-based traditional journal, but in that case he can place his manuscript of the article on the other or any other publication into the repository, or it's so-called self-archiving. And after the embargo period, the publication can be accessible publicly, but it depends on every publisher policy. And there is the other hybrid way, when some journals are hybrid journals, so they are like subscription-based journals with a possibility to open article optionally, but as well there is the article processing charges. And there is some positive and negative parts when the researcher trying to decide in what way he want to publish its research results. And for example, if the researcher decide to use the golden route to publish its research results, it is a positive thing that that publication become the open access immediately. But the negative part of it is that every journal, every open access journal have that APC cost, which is quite sometimes huge. If the researcher decides to choose the green route to publish their research result, they are looking to the subscription-based journal. There is a positive things that it can choose from the very wide spectrum of subscription-based journal without any extra fees. but it is the case that the publication mostly not become the open access right away. So there is the embargo period, which is depends on every publisher. Now I would like to talk a bit about our position on the APC costs. On the APC cost, so according to the guidelines, the Research Council can cover the APC costs from which project promoters can use from the project funds. So it's aligned with our policy, but we are not accept the hybrid journals. Here in this scheme, in this left corner, you can see the average prices of the APCs by the different publishers. So, and you see that this average prices is quite huge when we are looking to that well-known publishers. So, for example, the Sage, the Taylor and Francis, PLOS, Elsevier, the average price for one publication for the APC is more than the €1,500. Okay, and now I would like to speak very shortly about the open access to research data. So in our in Research Council, we're asking the project leader to ensure the preservation of data. And by doing that, he have to accumulate so-called the data management plan. And this kind of regulation is very similar to the Horizon 2020 program. And mostly in this data management plan, the project promoter should answer some questions like how and under what conditions the data will be accessible for the reuse. If there are no conflicting legal, ethical factors of security concerns, how and when the data will be open for other users, and etc. So, to summarize our open access policy in the Research Council of Lithuania, we mentioned that in our competitive funding schemes, the Research Council can cover the APC cost for the project promoters if they decide to publish their research results in the open access way. But we see that we can do even more in our institution to promote this idea of open science, but there is still undergoing discussion, and it includes a lot of stakeholders. So it is really good that, for example, today this conference was organized by the stakeholders from the very different aspects, like from the private entities. So it is good that conversation about these topics going on in our country. What we see, what we are thinking about the futures in the Research Council and what kind of questions we are trying to ask to improve our policy. For example, how to reassure that researchers publish their research results in the open access way. What we, as institution, we can do to kind of change that traditional behavior of the researchers. The other important question, for example, what alternative metrics do we have to use to evaluate the research impacts most precisely in the open access journals? The third question, which is very important, do we need to establish any incentive system for the researchers and institutions who publish their research results in open access way? For example, when we evaluating the performance of the research organizations by evaluating their publications. So there is a lot of questions which we are trying to consider in our institution. And I hope that we will be able to continue this discussion and somehow establish the correct open science policy in Lithuania. Thank you.
Thank you very going to be questions about implementation of the policy or what?
Aušra Vaškevičienė, National Library of Lithuania. Do you have information how much our academic institutions pay for open access from your funds or from their own funds?
Thank you. Now we are trying to reach this number because we prepared the questionnaire for the research institutions, and hopefully, like until the end of this year, we will be able to get the results and evaluate the situation. Because, like at the moment, we do not have the number.
More questions, please. If there are, yeah, you have a question.
I see your policy is not to pay APCs in hybrid journals. Why is that?
I have to answer this question. Double bidding. Just because, there was a strong movement against hybrid journals. Supposedly, we pay twice for the same, or even more times, and it's not fair. So, following the not so much advice, but kind of opinion of ERC and some institutions, and some other policies from other countries, we excluded hybrid journals preparing this policy. Do we have any other questions for Irmantas? If not, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I have to hold the microphone for my own presentation. It's a little bit of a conflict of interest. I'll be chairing and presenting at the same time. That's the last presentation before our discussion. I'll try to cut it as short as possible. What I did was to combine two kind of standalone topics, open access as such and data. So I'll talk about open access and data as such, and I'll try to fill in some gaps in our understanding or misunderstanding of data when we communicate among ourselves. Well, first of all, I'd like to start with a concept of areas of open science. That is really broad, diverse, and Irmantas already covered some of it. So what I want to say is that open access usually is to publications, research infrastructures, and data. In each case, different approaches to openness are there. Because open access to publication involves some criteria for openness. It's totally different for research infrastructures when we talk about access to hardware and data. We talk about open access to data, which is not really open. So some concepts may be misleading in how they are named. Same holds good true for the concept of data. When we talk about research data, not data in general, public, administrative, or any other data, even if we talk about research data, we have different types in our minds because we come from different fields. Being discipline-specific data can also be based in typology on time. It's usually post-research data that funding agencies have in mind when they discuss their policies. So actually it's research output data, that's most popular, default use, or pre-research data or input data that has been collected for different purposes. That can be public, administrative, as it has been presented here. It's open, we can use it for our research, and social sciences do it. Clinical internet as data archive, previous research data, so actually a wide, broad scale of data. And of course, based on place where data is compiled, accumulated, it can be institutional repository, national, disciplinary data archives, data-based research infrastructures. And last, classification of types is based on type. It's numerical, textual, visual. And below you see the definition of data as provided by the Research Council of Norway, how they understand and how they use it in their policies. They take into account any type of data as long as it is an output data. Open access to data. Funders usually have unified approach, and they talk broadly about results of research that include both publications and data. Well, countries have different policies, and I just tried to show you some of them. Let's say UK. In UK, they apply the same rules to data as to publications, but they have in mind data that is attached to publication, not as self-standing or archived data somewhere else. And I think for present-day discussion, this type of data is the most important. Canada also requires access to data together with publications, or if not, it has to be preserved, but not necessarily open for 5 years. European Research Council recommends to preserve and to share research data, also within the limits of copyright, personal data, national security restrictions, and they strongly support open access disciplinary data archives. Norway is the most advanced in that respect because, first of all, it has two different policies to publications and to data, and they apply their policies to output data, charge user for its retrieval, and have some other limitations. They also pinpoint specifically reason to exempt data from general principle, and in Lithuanian guidelines, the same reasons like security concerns, sensitive personal data, commercial, legal factors are mentioned. How a life cycle of data looks like with the two types of data. So we start with some kind of input data or no input data at all. It depends on the discipline. Then we continue with research. What we get is output data. We store them, we archive with identifiers, preserve data with metadata, and this is the most time, effort, and money-consuming activity. And metadata is very important because even if the data is not accessible, the metadata should be available. There was a big shift from the national policies on open access to data to the European movement that could be called fairness of data. The reason for that was openly stating some shortcomings in that area, that research data is not always open. If it's open, it lacks interoperability. It's well known for its fragmentation. And there are some needs for infrastructure like a high-performing computer. Last but not least, revisable EU copyright legislation. What I like about this open and not very much politically correct admission of European Commission about the situation is that the majority of challenges are social rather than technical, and they have to be overcome in one way or another. The way to overcome it is European Open Science Cloud that is hoped to accelerate the transition to more effective open science. So what is European Open Science Cloud made of? 3 components: data infrastructure, data, of course, networks, and powerful computers. And it should provide ability to analyze and exploit big data, and to get all the we should get all the benefits out of it and key impacts. What's in a name of EOSC? It might be misleading, and I'd like just to dwell shortly on each component. It's called European, but actually it's global. The innovation is global. It's called open, but not all data and tools can be open. It's obvious. There are exceptions for openness. And also openness very often is confused with something that stands for free. In this case, data do not stand for free. They do not exist. Science is in the name also, but in this case, EOSC includes arts and humanities. And some other disciplines that are outside sciences can and should be included. And finally, cloud. It can be misinterpreted because cloud associates for us for some ICT infrastructure. And much less about commons of data, software standards, expertise, and policies related to data-driven science. So what are the so-called research data infrastructures that usually accumulate the biggest amounts of data, and they are most welcome components for the European Open Science Cloud. The initial idea was, by the Commission, was that if we put all the research infrastructures and the data they compiled in one pile, we would get a very nice cloud already. What we need is something in between. Research infrastructures are good for that reason because they already provide well-preserved data that include metadata, tools, standards, services, expertise, policies. So they are ready for reusability of data. And EOSC will be built on existing research infrastructures, both hard and soft, that usually are supposed to be of this S3 ERIC type, but not necessarily, because as it turned out, Europe is full of other types of research infrastructures that have to be, first of all, registered and then promoted. And finally, the concept of FAIR that has been already mentioned and discussed today, that data, instead of just being open, they have to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. What's good about the acronym, apart that it's very nice and made on purpose to be nice, it's that it can be scalable. Data can be findable, but nothing else. You find it and you know that it exists. It can be accessible or have a restricted access. It can be both findable and accessible, but not interoperable, and it's still good, better than nothing. And it can be findable, accessible, interoperable, but not reusable. So you can still negotiate, you can still get an access and use that data in some ways that are allowed. What fairness of data is not about, and it's good that it's not about a strict standard, no prescriptive approach, but permissive approach. It's not meant just for humans. It has to be machine readable, and that's the most important fact about it. We are very proud of all our data we have, but if it's not machine readable, we can simply admit that we don't have it. And of course, it's not equal to open data as far as some exemptions of the openness are concerned. Just to show you that these words, parts of the acronym, are not vague and all-inclusive. There are strict, or not that strict, protocols and explanations for each of them. I won't go into details, just to show that they exist, and they were compiled at the very beginning of the movement, a group that is called Force 11. And that's not enough for data to be fair. Now people want to have something more. In an ideal case, data should be not only fair, but reproducible. It's very important in the case of academic ethics, research integrity, to be repeatable, to be replayable, that's more or less of the same, to be repurposable. That's the point about the data, that it has to be used for some other purposes that it was compiled initially. It has to be referenceable. That's for the research councils. If we make our data as referenceable as our publications, I'm sure people will be much more keen on compiling and opening it, as it was the case with astronomy. To be respectful, and the most important and the most expensive, to be sustainable. Just because to have sustainable data costs a lot. And once I was told that a big set of servers that have their data open round the clock takes as much electricity as Frankfurt airport per 24 hours. So we have to keep that in mind, trying to answer some questions concerning access to data that is fair. First of all, the question about responsibility. Who is responsible for a long-term preservation, curation, and open access to data? Research funding or performing institutions? In the case of publishers or any other institution? And who would provide financial support? What and how to support researchers' data producing project with special top-up money, his or her institution, or research data curating infrastructure? We haven't answered this question in our country. And of course, at what expense? Additional donation, research funds, or its dissemination? That can explain why we have not so many projects that would like to compile data, because it goes at the expense of the researchers' salaries. And finally, for whom open access to data, when we have it, is affordable? And a few closing remarks. The main principle behind data, and open data especially, is that data should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So you see, the approach is very flexible. Openness of data is highly debatable. What I like is the second stance, the second opinion, that it's more expensive to lose post-research data once it has been compiled than to preserve it. And it's even more expensive to ignore and not compile research data than to collect and to preserve it, finally. And the last aphorism or idea is for those who are not willing to share their post-research data. It's anonymous, but it's very popular. The coolest thing to do with your research results, in this case with your data, will be sought not by you, but by someone else. So much about it. Do we have any questions, or shall we start discussion immediately?
Maybe one question, Ruta. We already discussed this, don't you think that open data depend on the research field? Because in some sciences, let's say life sciences, others, yes, open data is a must. Because even in the journals, in the publications, you may not have access to publication, but you always will have open access to data on websites. So this is sometimes a bit different from, let's say, social sciences and other sciences. And I would like that you could mention maybe this in your presentation as well. We discussed this.
Yeah, that's why I try to show that there are different types of data and different approaches, and that was part of our controversy with Eugenius, because we publish our data, what do you want of it? And when we write our policies, we have to have that in mind. But on astronomy, they have had their data open since times immemorial, and another good feature that they accept references to data, not only to publications, even if data are kept somewhere else. And that's why they have very high indexes, especially those people who started compiling data. So yes, it's different, and it's very difficult to write one general policy for all types of data, and open access to data, and open access as such in general. And I would suggest that we should have some different approaches and different legal acts for different cases.
There's another angle on preservation that I think needs to be thought about, and that is the you could call it version control, or the need to preserve data that evolves over time. In the world of statistics, statisticians love to revise their data backwards, and in the past that wasn't a problem, because statistical publications would freeze the data, because the data was printed on the page and it would be stuck in a library, so you could go back and you could see what the data was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Today, statisticians will overwrite the data, which means you can no longer see the past. And that's a problem, because the data could have been cited 10 years ago. And then someone is checking, and then the numbers are different. And then you have a trust issue, because the number in the database does not agree with the number that's in a publication. And so I think there needs to be some thought about this, because it's not just a question of preserving the data, but it's also a question of preserving the data in time, such that those who are responsible for the data do not overwrite the past, because that is what is happening in statistics at the moment. And I had a constant battle with the statisticians of the OECD about this. They would even ask me to delete old publications from our website because they said they are out of date. And I would always respond by saying, and you want me to go to all the libraries and pull all the books off the shelves and burn them? Is that what you're asking me to do? No. You know, we don't agree with burning books. I said, well, that's exactly what you've asked me to do. You've asked me to delete a piece of the historical record. the statistical record. And at the moment, I'm worried that there aren't enough processes in place to stop it. They're not being evil. It's just the way that they work. But so one thing is to have the technical way of preserving it. The other is to have the social way of preserving it to stop people inadvertently overwriting the past.
Yes, thank you for raising this issue. It's really very important. Technical side of it means that it's going to be even more complicated and more expensive. But also the issue of the legal regulation, it has to be forbidden. And it's not. And you know, all the stories about retracted papers that tried to get out, even from the libraries, from elsewhere. And the data that they used for their false, for some reason, false results, they are there. And nobody tells that, well, you should not pay any attention to it. So actually, it adds very much to the chaos that is already here. But we have to think how to deal with it. One more.
For your talk, I've enjoyed very much your slide on what's in a name, I must say. And I think that the part on open is actually very misleading in that case in the European Open Science Cloud, because it stands in stark contrast with what open means in open access definition, where it has to be free for anyone to reuse with no cost. And this is not the case with the EOSC, right, where there are more restrictions than actually freedom to reuse that data. So who can have access, and also that you need to pay for doing that, although it was publicly funded, right? So I was wondering just if open has become a sort of a necessary attribute or a buzzword, something of open zeitgeist we have here, that you have to label any initiative open in order to be seen as modern or progressive, and if there's maybe a slight risk of open washing, let's say that some ordinary initiatives which are not that open at all might be labeled as such and just be promoted more quickly because of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As a linguist, I always try to draw attention to terms, to names, to concepts, and to warn people that be careful when you communicate. Just ask, what do you mean by data? What do you mean by open? What does it for you? Anything? Any? Yes, please.
Thank you. Ginta Medvedskaite, Vilnius University Library Research Data Officer. Just thinking from a scholarly or from a researcher's perspective, we all know data is what research lives on, but if you think about it, what is acknowledged is research output, and data doesn't count as research output. You can't write a thesis on just collecting data, and you can't just publish data as that. I mean, you could do that for the common good and your own fun, but most of the scholars live on grants or they have to get their jobs. And currently there is no incentive for them to publish data. And it is a lot of work to make a data set fair according to all these principles. So I don't think there's much incentive for them to do that at the moment, because there's a lot of unacknowledged work in that.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. It's a real burning issue, and compilation of data should be acknowledged, because I believe in it that publications get outdated much faster than data. On the contrary, good data is like old wine. It has to be kept for a while and well, updated with some new types, new versions, and then it's really reusable. But what I want to say is that there are different disciplines, and in linguistics, we compile corpora, we compile special databases that have to be representative. And if I want to have a corpus, which we did in 1994, long ago, it's open access corpus since then, although the concept came into being much later. But what we did, we tried to represent Lithuanian written language, and you have to investigate it. You have to ask people what they read, how much they read of what, and if they write, what they write. And we publish papers. So it depends. But this is an input data. With the output data, the story is different. And what I like about this conference, and I would like to thank the organizers once again, that we have this topic into the public discourse, not just among ourselves. And we have to start talking about it and hear other different stories from different disciplines and see what will come out of it. That's it. So now I'd like to invite all the presenters and also Vilma Popovienė from the Ministry of Education, Science and Sports for a discussion. Bet gal nieko. Gerai? Ai, pasidėti viską. The format of a discussion is usually like that people talk first, all the discutants trying to answer the same question from their own perspective, and then we discuss among ourselves and also with the audience about the main issue. And I suggest the issue to be how to get to Limerick, starting from where we are. Meaning, what's to be done here and now so that we could approach open access, open science. I don't know how many steps, could be 12, could be 24, could be more. But what your suggestion would be. And that the suggestion also includes beating in your breast and telling what we have not done until now and what has to be done. So Toby is excluded from that part of. Who would like to start?
Hello, everyone. First of all, from the perspective of the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport, we see the need to have the common agenda at European, national, and also institutional levels. And of course, it's very important to have the open discussions with academia and also stakeholders and private sector. So it's very important to see what we have now, and as it was mentioned, now we have a lot of institutions having their own databases, archives, libraries, publishing houses, and so on and so on. So I think it's very important to analyze current situation and agree on common platform or other instrument to in order to participate in these European initiatives as the European Open Science Cloud and having in mind the digital agenda. So now the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport is working on open access guidelines. And as soon as we will have the first draft, I think we will open the discussion between all stakeholders and academia, and we hope that we will reach the common agreement and support of academia and private sector on new approach, new models maybe, and of course we understand that to change the used behavior of institutions, we have to see the new assessment and incentive system. So I think we'll have to come to that point also.
Thank you. So the discussion is definitely very important, and I very much welcome the discussion today, the event today, because the awareness, as already mentioned, is a very important point for getting us further. We actually have the concrete action plan, and we're following that action plan step by step. There are more than 12 steps, even more than 24. Smaller steps to get us to closer to the European Union average and going beyond that. But again, you've mentioned very important points, that open data is not a free data. It's definitely not a free data, and it's very expensive, not free data. So, and we definitely need to understand how much and to analyze how much of open data we would like to see and what will be the overall economic impact through that data. So from our point of view, from the Ministry of Economy and Innovation point of view, it is very important to not only to open as much as we can, but to see the opportunities that we can grasp from that. Regarding what Toby mentioned, that's an interesting aspect of changing the statistics. It's a nightmare for any statistician or any researcher, I believe. But there are technicalities that actually can solve it, and one of the examples already many years ago, you know, in Georgia, they had this specific situation when the registry of land has been changing all the time. You know, today you're an owner of the land, tomorrow you're not already, and so the blockchain actually it helped to put that in order, that any single change is registered. So you know who, by whom, how, and what was the change meant. So there are technical platforms that are opening, closing the questions on that. It's just the question how to implement them. And of course, this holistic systemic approach, it is the most important thing that we need. Because the data is important, and the importance of data is just growing. It's already 5 years from now that all the 90% of all the data available in the world has been gathered through the last 2 years. And this number is only growing now. It's 93% as far as I remember. So it's getting more and more. So the last 2 years are the most important, and of course the archaic data or historical data should be also preserved and should be important for us and for our predecessors. Regarding where we would like us to see in 5 to 10 years, again, it is very difficult to predict. And I wouldn't be the fortune teller, but I think that we need to put more attention towards the overall approaches, so that we can grasp the trendy things, and that open data wouldn't be just the buzzword for us, but become a routine.
There's one thing I didn't mention, and the question is what one thing could be done to move things forward. Well, there is one very simple thing that could be done that would really move things forward, and that is if every publisher made everything that they publish free to read online. That's not the same as open access. They simply make a read-only version of their publications and they put them online for free. OECD approach. It's the OECD approach. Now, why did we come to that approach at the OECD? At the OECD, I had something called a publishing policy that was imposed on me by the members. And the publishing policy had two pieces. One, I had to maximize dissemination of the OECD's work, which is a very interesting thing because basically you can never maximize it or maximize it out. It meant that I had to keep thinking of ways to move the dissemination and grow the dissemination. And the other piece is that I had to earn enough money to pay for the publishing operation because the members chose not to fund the publishing operation. And it's an 11 million euro operation, employs 70 people. So how do you maximize dissemination and earn money? Now, if we put everything behind a paywall, we plainly could not maximize dissemination. But if we made everything open access, we plainly could not earn the money that we needed to run the operation. So we came up with this freemium model. And we literally made every publication free to read only. It's a read-only experience. You go online, you can read the text in full, but you can't copy-paste, you can't save it, you can share it, you can even embed it in your own website, but that's all you can do with it. So it's not perfect open access, but it achieves one enormous advantage. Anyone on the planet with an internet connection can read an OECD report from beginning to end for free, which is huge. And if every publisher did it, that would be huge. And guess what? We didn't lose a single subscription because we went freemium.
From the perspective of Research Council, maybe I would like to make 2 points. The first of all, I already mentioned it at my presentation, that like currently at the European level, the open science and open access policies like really hot topic, but in this case it was mentioned there from one person in the class that it becoming really like trendy and buzzy word, but sometimes it's really hard to understand what sometimes the definitions means. So in this case, I believe it is very worth to try to keep in touch with all that initiative was going on in the European level, but keep in mind that even those countries who are the flagmans in this open science policy, like the Belgium and Netherlands, or etc., they are facing the problems. So as the institution, the Research Council, we have the very limited resources, so we have to somehow find those good examples and just only implement them if we see that that policy work in those flagman countries. And the second point is we have to understand that if we want to establish the like well-made open science policy system in our country, we have to understand that we are at the same boat, so we have to speak with each other. As the Research Council, I think we can do more to try to like organize any kind of conference related to that topic, because we want to understand what is the position of the other stakeholders in the country, from what is the publisher's perspective, what is the universities and research organization position on these policies, and what can we do to establish the system. So we have to really open this discussion.
From my own perspective, I see 2 big gaps in open data, or to be more exact, fairness of data produced here in the country. First of all, we do not have a permanent channel for funding it. What the Research Council does, it funds competitive research. Fair data production is not a competitive research. Usually data projects fail the competition. Then we have structural funds from EU that also cannot be used for full-scale data production, because usually the hardware can be financed out of it, hard infrastructure, sometimes membership fees, and that's it. So we have to admit we don't have money for fair data in Lithuania. Then we don't have any institution to take proper care of it. Just because all the institutions have their own, well, legitimate statutes that they are framed into their tasks and responsibilities, and actually no one has this responsibility, had it up to now, while, for example, in Sweden they have a research council that is dedicated specifically for open access and data. So we have to admit that something has to be done in that respect. And then, of course, we talked today about data-driven science, but we do not give any credits for people producing and sharing data. That can be changed much easier than the financial part of it, and that should be done immediately, I believe. So, the first round is over. Would you like each of us, I mean, the presenters, the members of the discussion, to react to each other's views and what has been told? First of all, I'll ask you, and then I'll ask people from the audience. What would you? I wanted to ask Vilma, would you take it upon yourself, I mean, as a ministry, not personally, to take care about the financial, financial aspects of, well, research, data research infrastructures, fair data, just because now we are pushed into European Open Science Cloud, we have to have our strategies, policies, and they have to be based on possible finances.
Thank you. Usually the most complicated question about financing issues, but yes, we have it in mind, and now as we are planning a new strategy for science, technology and innovation policy, and also new measures and plans for a new period of structural funds, we have it in mind, and we'll try to plan. Of course, I cannot promise that it will be very, you know, not structural funds, not just some kind of financing that goes from the budget, but we hope that we will have concrete measures for these infrastructures, for open access and joining European Open Science Cloud initiative. So yes, I think our ministry will work on that.
We'll wait for the results impatiently. Ekaterina, what about you? Can you add to this financial issue as it is now?
So on the financial issue, definitely we're working on the same thing as the Ministry of Education, Science and Sports. Science and Sports. Now we're pretty much putting a lot of efforts on the new programming period, and one of our aim is actually to get connected, you know, between the Ministry of Economy and Innovation and Ministry of Education and Science and Sports, because we have a lot in common, and we start, you know, everything starts from data, education, right, and then hopefully ends up with a profit. So in that sense, we're putting a lot of initiatives in the same curriculum.
Now I want to skip Toby and ask a question to Irmantas. So back to the Research Council of Lithuania. What will you do tomorrow? It's Friday. Still, something can be done concerning the issue.
I believe the first thing we will try to do tomorrow is to raise the internal discussion, and mainly not only on the issue regarding that competitive research funding, but as I mentioned at my last slide, the other questions regarding what the Research Council can do more on that open science policy system as such, because, for example, as personally, I see some aspects where we can include that open access in, for example, research institutions evaluation, for example, and to establish some kind of incentive systems. So, for example, every year the Research Council is doing the evaluation of the research publications. So we're receiving and trying to evaluate about the 6,000 publications from the different 6,000 publications from a very different research fields, which is provided by the research institutions, and we are giving the points for each publication. So, for example, we are giving more points for the publication which is published in the journal, which is which are in the databases like the Web of Science and Scopus and have that impact factor or SNP factor. So maybe the one incentive can be that we will give more points for the publication which is published in the open access journal or somehow published openly. It's just an idea, but we have to like discuss it and try where we can go.
I have some more questions, especially for Toby Green, but I don't want to monopolize questioning part. Maybe you have some questions, suggestions, criticism. Well, we are very open. Elena?
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the questions today as well, but I just found interesting your last point and wanted to react to that. So the tricky part, of course, how to change that incentive system that is at the root cause of the all evil, as it sounds today. So whether to give extra points if you publish an open access journal or not, and I think I would try and argue with a cautionary note, and probably would warn from doing that, because by giving extra points for publishing in an open access journal, you risk to repeat the same mistake, that you're evaluating the work on the basis where it is published and not on the work itself, not on its merits. So it would just repeat the same fallacy in the thinking as well. And also in one of your slides that you had on the pros and cons of different models, right? It is also somewhat misleading message to read the policy of the council that says that hybrid journals are not funded, so APCs for hybrid journals are not funded because of double dipping, because you pay for subscription and publishing fees at the same time, and that's not a good thing economically, obviously, but at the same time your slide implies that high impact journals can only be found among subscription or hybrid journals. So I think it's time to depart from that idea and to take academic, scholarly-led initiatives and the critical infrastructure that is there in academic hands more seriously. Thank you.
Can I just respond to the point about double dipping? I've got a question. Is there any incentive for scholars in Lithuania to publish more articles? Are they rewarded by the volume of what they publish? Everyone's nodding.
Yeah, they do.
Everyone's nodding.
Now it changed.
Okay.
Now it's quality at best.
But universities, yeah.
Valued, but quality as well now.
Okay, so it's quality and quantity. No, there's some debate.
This is not publishing.
It's connected. Okay. So a scholar does some research, and the scholar could write one paper, or they could write 2 papers, or 3. And in fact, the incentive is for them to publish 2 or 3. So suddenly what you've done is you put in an incentive system to triple the cost of publishing the results of that research. So you have a double or triple dipping system whereby the scholar is encouraged to dip into the system 2 or 3 times to get published. You've got double, triple, quadruple dipping going on because of the incentive in the system. I'm not aware of any publishers who actually double dip in the market because they do make adjustments to their prices based on what they publish. So this evil of double dipping, is it really in the publishers or is it in the system?
Okay, that's destroying some of our stereotypes, and we have to rethink many things, yeah? Just because we have one-sided perspective very often, and we don't get, to tell the truth, I have never ever received any publisher's perspective so far, and so open, so thank you for that. But is any other questions before I go on with mine? Yes, please.
Nijolė Pliužiuvienė from the National Library of Lithuania. I would like to ask you about the libraries from your point of view, how libraries can be useful for or involved in open access organization or processes or digital transformation processes. Thank you.
To whom do you address the question? To everyone. Well,
I think libraries already are involving, and they were the first ones who raised this open access question when we starting to talk about it. So I think they could be involved in this process actively. And I cannot be very concrete now, but I'm thinking about maybe a little bit new models in the perspective, like making some kind of consortia or platform, as I mentioned, where can be involved not just academia, but also stakeholders, when they can join forces and then together also get to these European initiatives. So we look forward for cooperation, and I think, as I have noted, Irmantas saying that they will organize conferences and discussions. So I think we have to talk about it more with you all.
So from my perspective, actually, I believe that libraries is a part of the transformation, and they're a very active part. We've seen good examples of this transformation, not only in Lithuania, but also in abroad. And I believe it's a part of an agenda. It just cannot be standing aside.
Well, of course, librarians fundamentally fund Skolkom because it's the library budgets that have been paying for all the publications for time immemorial, and therefore they're clearly a very big actor in the whole equation. I have an interesting sort of reflection on the role of libraries. In Denmark, all of the academic libraries have been reorganized into a single entity, and this has caused a lot of unhappiness amongst the librarians, because the librarians see themselves as having 2 roles. One is collection development, and the other is to provide services for their users. And these are, you might think they're the same role, but actually they're 2 different roles. And clearly, in a world, in an analog world, the idea of having local collections makes sense. It's an efficient thing to do. In a digital world, the idea of collection building maybe is less important. And therefore the librarian role perhaps needs to evolve much more towards a role of educating and of advising and of helping to guide the users in their institutions, and maybe taking the lead in terms of trying to change the behavior and to educate the scholars on their behaviors. We've been talking a little bit earlier, I'll give you one example. We've been talking a little earlier about the business of citing data, or the business of including data in the citation record and giving value to the people who created that data. One of the things we did in 2004 at the OECD was to make all our data citable in its own right. And we created downloadable citations that are compatible with all of the bibliographic management systems for all of the OECD's data sets. And so if you go into the OECI library, you can find a piece of data, you can download a citation just as easy as you can download a citation for a journal article or a book or whatever. And yet nobody uses them. Nobody uses them. They only cite journal and working papers and books. They will not cite the data sets because it's not in the culture. It's not in the way that it's done. The way it's done is you use a piece of OECD data, you make a graph in your thing, and you put underneath source, OECD, name of database. And usually they get it wrong. But that's the way that people do it. So, it's so hard to change that. But I see librarians could have the role inside their institutions to teach people how to publish for a digital age, how to arrange information for a digital age, so that things like putting a citation for a piece of data in with all the other references just as they would a journal article, that's the sort of role I think a librarian can have in the future.
It is hard to be very specific right now, but for example, the Research Council in its current evaluation system is right now really connected with the leidybos system because the research organizations now can import the research publications straight to the evaluation system. So in that kind of perspective, we are really cooperating with each other. The other idea that maybe the libraries can provide the important statistics for the Research Council, because sometimes some part of the publications are out of our radar, because mostly we're counting the publications which is related to the competitive funding, but not all the Lithuanian publications as such. So maybe the statistics can be a very important thing.
Well, I'd like to go along the same line as Toby started. Actually, I took some words from my mouth. That libraries, they were pioneers in open access, or just disseminating the approach, but now they should take upon themselves the task to fill in one niche that universities seem to be very slow to take care of. The niche is about the people that have to do with all the data, the so-called infra people. Some experts claim that in the next 5 or 10 coming years in Europe, we'll need something like 12 million people who will deal with data, but they would not be researchers themselves. Researchers cannot do everything, starting from the project writing and then dealing with the data they compiled. So actually we need these people, we need their help. In an ideal case, there should be special programs at the universities, but they are not there yet. And to start with, it could be very good if you could do this service, if you could organize all kinds of teaching programs that would end with official certificates, that people would be motivated to take part in it, the people who could deal with the data and of course open access and some other issues. Yes, please.
I'm very glad you raised this question about librarians being educators. Today, really, we even don't have a library school in Lithuania. Nobody's training librarians. Librarians is a dying profession. So now, and in order to have all those qualifications, you need to know about data, you need to know about databases, about subscriptions, understand open access, and educate the others. You need to be qualified yourself in order to do all this. So now people who are employed by some academic libraries start looking for those people. But then they are self-educated. They're going to conferences, they're reading. So this is the main source where they are picking up the information. And this shouldn't be like this. Education should be needed. But I wanted also to raise another question about sustainability. Currently, what we have in Lithuania is sort of a project funding. So now we have a big project on this, then a project on that. Then this project ends, and guess what happens? There is no funding. The idea was very good. Lots of money was invested. And then nobody's keeping this idea. Good ideas are dying. And for example, you can't get money only from the structural funds. Eventually, those structural funds will end. What we're having now, for example, most of the subscription is going from the structural funds money. And the project that we're having will end in 2021. And what will happen then? 30 million for 4.5 years is given for subscription, 30 million. This 30 million will end in 2021, and a big question mark is raised: who is going to pay for subscription? And all the universities are in shock, because the ministry said that before the second round of the structural funds will happen, it will not be earlier than 23 or 24. What will be in 21, 22, 23? Nobody knows. So I don't know. So this is a big issue. This sustainability, it should be planned in advance. You can't think about this when the money is ending. You need some a plan for a long planning.
Thank you. May I interpret this question as a rhetorical question, and also as a suggestion, as a topic for the next similar event? Our time is out, it's a pity, but for the session, but you can please go on, continue communicating during the lunch break and next afternoon session. Thank you ever so much once again, and see you sometime later. Thank you.